Hi, you guys. I'm here with Heather Arnold. She is an author and a researcher, and she's really particularly researching besides megalithics and all the cool ancient stuff that we like. She's also researching the giants of Aruba, which is the only person I know doing that. So that's super awesome. So hello, welcome, Miss Heather.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
So like we got to get on this thread. Okay, so we were just talking about she's about to go to Monument Valley, and I was in Monument Valley a couple like a year ago, and we were talking about I was saying that one of my native tours was like Anasazi doesn't mean what you guys think it means. That's just our word for enemy tribe. It's not even, we just think it's funny when you guys are like, oh, it's the Anasazi tribe. He's like, ha ha ha, because that just and then you were saying that it was what?
So, it was a made up name by Weatherhill. Weatherhill was an explorer, an archaeologist who was really a researcher. He was funded by the Museum of Natural History, and he was doing research for the museum on behalf of them in Mesa Verde and in Chaco Canyon, in particular Chaco Canyon. So he's very interesting. So he just created this word. He made up that word Anasazi. That Weatherhill is attributed to him. The word Anasazi is attributed to Weatherhill. He's actually buried at Chaco Canyon right before Pueblo Bonito. If you're going along the Loop Trail, his grave site is right there. Interestingly, his last name is spelt wrong, which is very odd. And so he created that name. And then after speaking with archaeologists who are open-minded, they told me that they believe they see similar connections between the Hopi and the what we are calling Anasazi, and that the Anasazi were probably proto Hopi, so some of the first Hopi to reach the shores of North America, because their creation event, their migration event, says that they went across the Pacific Ocean in boats and then stopped in California and then went out into the desert. That's one of their ancient migration stories. And Joe Ben Sanders, who I went hiking with in Three Rivers Petroglyphsite in New Mexico a couple of months ago, he told me that he believes that the people of Chaco and Mesa Verde, that they were all this Hopi, essentially, and an ancient Hopi, the first Hopi to be here. So yeah, so that name is just totally made up. It's not, I guess some people use it, but it is, it's not attached to anything except just a name that was created. And I guess it was a differentiation between the tribes today and what they were seeing in Chaco and in Mesa Verde and the other sites, of course, Aztec, etc. But the connection is that they probably were the same people. So there's a lot more similarities than not, and which is quite interesting, because when you think of it then in terms of them being the original Hopi, then a lot of things make more sense than it being a
Like
distinct
a
group
distinct
of
tribe.
people that disappeared. That's oh, they just disappeared. I don't think they
Well,
disappeared. I
what
think,
do you think about the Chaco people just disappearing though?
yeah, the Chaco, I think they were ran out, from I mean, I've done extensive hiking there, and if you go to some of those hikes and you see how remote these sites are that they created, these structures, it's almost like they were looking out for something. And one of the things, interestingly, that Richard Weatherhill discovered, and why his funding was pulled from the Museum of Natural History, was he discovered that the Chacoans were eating each other. They were cannibals. They also had, most of them had 6 fingers and 6 toes, and some of them even had elongated skulls, which is quite interesting. So I personally think, I mean, if they were cannibals, I mean, they did things that were so crazy. They would go and eat someone and then defecate that person out in front of the home of the family of that person they just ate. I mean, the revengeful people, they would also, so they would find, the the artifacts of ancient defecations of these people they were eating, of the human remains, that is still a viable way to determine if someone is being a cannibal, as well as the fact that the way the bones were broken, there were teeth marks on the bones. You could see where the marrow was sucked out of the bones. So personally, I mean, also the site, don't forget, was almost buried after it was deserted. I personally think they were ran out because they were very bloodthirsty. Weatherhill, when he discovered this, he reported it back to the museum. And actually, an article was written about him in Vanity Fair. I actually have a copy of it saying, "Wow, this guy is here, and he's discovered that these people are we're eating each other." You know, it's very sensational. Sold a lot of magazines. But interestingly, because at that time New Mexico was a territory that the United States wanted to incorporate as a state, the government didn't want Weatherhill saying this and portraying the native population potentially as savages, which is their words. So they pulled the funding and stopped Weatherhill from doing any more research ever again. And so his research essentially died with him. And now recently, open-minded archaeologists have been looking at the sites and determined that there was cannibalism going on at Chaco Canyon. So it took over 100 years, but now finally, almost 100 years, but now finally people are seeing that, revisiting Weatherhill's conclusion and coming up with the same conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I the only thing is that like there haven't been that many bodies found there, right? Like for like when, or at least they say that there's like mainstream says there's 30 or so bodies that have been ever found at Chaco Canyon. So that's kind of one of the, I mean, I guess they really were run out for something. I mean, they left, like they found full pots and baskets with turquoise jewelry apparently, and like, you know, stuff that you wouldn't leave just for whatever. I mean, like so yeah, that like it's really really fishy. Even if it was a drought, like that the mainstream says like, oh, a drought like what ran them out, you would take your jewelry with you.
I think they, because there's so many Chaco and outliers. I just went to one a couple of months ago in New Mexico on the top of a mesa. It's just, you wouldn't even be able to see it from the ground. So it was totally hidden. And then, of course, Three Rivers Petroglyphsite is also believed to be the same Hopi or the proto-Hopi that are considered the Anasazi. So they wrote their whole migration stories on the stones, and they drew a lot of parrots. And Chaco was the parrot center of the Americas at that time. They were one of the few cultures able to breed parrots in captivity, and this gave them a lot of elite status, as well as their ability to find turquoise from all over, not just from the New Mexico area, but also as far down as the Sonoran Desert in Mexico, what is today Mexico. So, and they wrote on these stones in Three Rivers Petroglyphsite about the parrots, and they show people with the parrots on their arm and their petroglyphs. So I think they migrated. I don't think they just disappeared, but unless you put the two and two together that these were proto-Hopi, you'll miss that fact that they probably kept migrating south or migrated north, because they're also, Aztec is north of Chaco, the Salmon Ruins, Canyon de Chelly, if you even wanted to incorporate that. I found a petroglyph in Chaco of one of the mittens from Monument Valley. So I think they probably migrated out and just left that land. And I think personally it was just either it was taken over, and they were run out, or or by someone, or they were run out, or they felt they were in some sort of danger. Because I agree, it was too abrupt. But the burials, I think there are a lot more burials in Pueblo Bonito. You've seen it, so I mean, you see how there are pieces of wood propping up the walls. I mean, that's why they're trying to stop all the fracking going around the area, because of that vibration of the ground. They're afraid the walls will just collapse. And I think a lot of the archaeological digs have stopped, even though it's still an active archaeological site, simply because of the fragile condition of the ruins. And I believe there are a lot more. I think Pueblo Bonito, in all those rooms, there are tons of burials. And I just think that
Yeah, it's
between
true.
the
The place is not completely excavated, so.
at all. Exactly. And some of it's still buried in sand, which is quite interesting.
Mhm.
And very cool because you feel like when you see these sites that you're like the first explorer to come across them, how they must have looked back then. I mean, some of them aren't excavated at all. So it's quite interesting. But I think they migrated, and I think there are more burials at Chaco.
Yeah, I mean, and I went back down to the 7 mile hike that you do, like where you find like that petroglyph, like the star petroglyph. I can't remember what the name of that pueblo's called up there on that like far one, but I was like chased by like a bobcat and the huge bobcat. And so I mean it is a very isolated experience out in Chaco, and it's pretty perilous if you go like on the outskirts of everything too. So
It's a very dangerous hiking situation. I went with my daughter, and she started to go into heat exhaustion because we ran out of water. And I mean, the panic is just like, because there's no shade, there's
nothing.
no cell service, there's no one coming to get you. Fortunately, we found a cliff dwelling on the side of a wall, and we went in there. The temperature is about 20 degrees cooler. So if you're ever in a jam, go into a cliff dwelling. They really knew what they were doing, the ancients, by making those where they did, because
Mhm.
there was a breeze and she calmed down and she got better, and then we were able to get back to the car. But it's scary. It's a very scary hike. You are alone. You'll be the only person you see all day, so it's
Yeah.
very,
Oh, yeah. And you have to sign a little paper, like putting your name, like in
which
what
I
time you
found
left.
it doesn't even tell. It's not even for like where we are. It's just for the park to collect money from the government to determine how many people are doing those trails. That's what I found out. So that
Oh,
doesn't even help us. Just so
I
I
always
guess
thought
if
it
we
was like if you go missing, at least they know who went missing. But
That's what I always thought too, but it's really, they don't even look at them every day. So yeah, so it's just good to know. So don't rely on that either. Bring a lot of water.
yeah, but I think Chaco is one of the craziest mysteries, and it's also just such an impressive structure, and it's before the Spanish conquistador ever set foot on, like, I mean, it's just by any standard, it's an extremely impressive structure. So it's amazing that, and even what stands.
I agree. It is, once you see it, and it's such an adventure just to get there. That once you see it, you just can't believe. You're thinking, why were they here? Why were they here? It was equally as inhospitable then as it is now. So I don't know how they did it. They were definitely survivalists for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's go into your specialty, which is Aruba. Okay, so tell me the story of how Aruba like caught you the way it did.
Yeah, so I went there on vacation, and then I decided to move there, and I started a tour company. So we did Harley Davidson rentals and tours and private Jeep tours. And I wanted to get historically accurate tours, because I knew a lot of the tours that were going on were very sensationalized. The people are working on tips, so they'll make up little stories, and it's nice and it's interesting, but it wasn't really ringing true. And I mean, some of the tour guides are very invested in the history, but I soon found out it was very difficult to even find the ancient history of Aruba going into when the first explorers arrived. Usually, the history started when the first explorers arrived in 1499. So it was, there was a whole gap of history missing. So I just began to do research, and I came across a video of this archaeologist going crazy. He was speaking to a group. Believe it was an archaeological conference, and he just kept saying there are no giants in Aruba. There have never been giants in Aruba. I'm thinking, who's even asking about giants? Why is this guy going crazy? And then I immediately realized there were probably giants in Aruba. And so I just began to research further and found out that the original name of Aruba and Curacao, which are adjacent to one another, were the islands of the giants. And this was found and still found on the Mappus Mundi from 1502 by Juan de la Cosa. I believe now it's in a museum in Spain, in Seville. And on it are the two islands, and they are called the Islands of the Giants. And then I read Vespucci's documented trip to the islands of the giants, which his first stop was Aruba after arriving to the New World. And he documents his interaction with the giants, very detailed, talks about how they were living, what they looked like, how they were communicating. He even speaks about trying to steal two of the young girls who are way taller than he is, to bring back to Europe. And the men are concocting a plan, and when it's foiled by 36 men returning to this camp with these stone weapons and tools that they've never seen, they speak very in much detail about it. You can see this in Letters of the New World, by Amerigo Vespucci. It's a published book. It's very, very interesting.
Cool.
And then he writes about how he felt he almost was going to die that day. This was after he had just visited an island where there were cannibals. So what's interesting, what I found interesting about this was that when the explorers came to over here, they felt of themselves as documentarians. I mean, they were and researchers and true explorers, not just looking for gold and looking for treasure, which of course they were, and glory, but they brought over doctors, pharmacists, people who were experts in flora and fauna, so that everyone could document what they were seeing, even the sexual practices of the people, what they were wearing, what they were not wearing, what they were eating, how they were even, using the bathroom. I mean, it was just very.
Okay, sorry, we got cut off. We're going back to a thing.
So I was speaking about how first Amerigo Vespucci documented in a detail-oriented way about his interaction with the giants that he first came across on Aruba. And then I was discussing about how I then delved into the archaeological evidence, over 100 reports, field notes, published journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, all about the archaeological remains that have been uncovered of the giants through the years, starting from the early 1800s, actually probably mid to late 1800s, all the way until about, I believe, 1990 was the most recent, in the 90s, recent archaeological research done, and how from this evidence I discovered that there were actual giant burials that were uncovered by these archaeologists, and measurements were taken, and some photos were taken, and that's how I determined that there were actually giants in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, probably at least 5,000 years ago. I believe it could be even greater, maybe 7,000 years ago, and maybe even more. So I think as dating gets more and more sophisticated, that we'll get closer and closer to that original date when the giants were occupying the islands. But obviously their occupation went up to and through the introduction of the Europeans, because they actually interacted with them. The last interaction that I have documented from the giants was 1528. So that was the last mention of the giants at all, up until that period of time.
Yeah, that's really curious too, because like you said, like what was it, 1499 is the first time it was colonized, or what, by Europeans. So in less than 30 years you have, like, they're gone, but there was full colony or full towns of them. So that's a little bit kind of like, ooh, where'd they go? But were the giants the same on all three islands, and were they connected with each other?
Yes, that's a great question. So that's how the archaeologists were able to determine that this was actually one race of people. They are believed to be a separate race of people. The archaeological evidence supports this, and it's an actual thesis of one of the archaeologists based in Aruba, because they had these different anatomical structures. So for example, they had elongated skulls, and so with the cranial elongation that the giants of the Caribbean had, the head went up and back. So this made the brain case very heavy towards the back of the skull. And the accommodation anatomically for this was the positioning of the skull on the neck. So where that position is to accommodate this heavy weight and towards the back of the cranium. Also, the giants were taller. They were much taller. They had shovel-shaped teeth, which is very indicative of
like round,
like the
oh yeah.
instead of being flat like ours, they were like scooped. They're very strange. I have
Did they have
photos
the
of
double rows of teeth like a lot of giants?
no, not that any of that have been found, but that is that and six fingers, six toes often come frequently together or separately in some giant remains, particularly those found even here in New York, but not in Aruba. Mostly it was just the large stature, the shovel-shaped teeth, the elongated skull, and also they had very thick bones. Their bones were, you couldn't cut through them with an average cadaver saw that is used with modern humans. One of the archaeologists had to create his own saw to get through the bone because the bone was so thick. And this is something that's a common theme. Also, their lower jaw was larger than ours, and where it positioned on the skull is in a different position than modern humans. So because of these anatomical differences, as well as their burials, which were very distinct, the way they buried people, that's why they were able to determine that the remains found in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao were one group of people, and there was actually two breakaway civilizations of this same group of people. One is deep in the rainforest in Colombia, and one is in the caves of Cuba. So because of the anatomical differences of these skeletons and the type of burial, the very distinct burial of these people, the way they had them with the grave gifts and their little rock formations on top of them, and the positioning of the body, that they were able to determine this was all the same people.
Okay, so in Colombia, I went to this tribe called the Musca Tribe. I can't remember the name of the town that it's in, but that was the native, that's the native tribe that it was from. And they had these a kind of they had 700 of these skulls that they weren't bulbous in the back, but they had two separate bulbs like this, like almost like a butt head. They were like they had two globins like this, and and they wouldn't let me take pictures of the skulls. They were very adamant that they don't want people to know about them. They don't want people coming to them. They don't want them taken. They've had them take like the skulls taken. They're very protective of their skulls. You can go in and see them, but they watch you like a hawk. You cannot use your phone. You cannot do anything with them. But I remember going like, what the heck? This was like a completely new kind of human that I had never seen before. It wasn't like the Paracas skulls, but
Right.
but they were bigger. They were bigger than our skulls, but they were just like, meh.
Those skulls, that skull shape has also been found at burials in Aruba. So those, there is a grave site in a very high, about 500 feet high, limestone Aubrey. And on this burial, there's a giant burial of what's perceived to be a man, but then some archaeologists think it's a woman, which is interesting. The burial, the person is laying supine, which means, flat out on their back, which is very odd. And then there are burials of people coming out like spokes in a wheel, all around this central burial. And some of the skeletal remains were of average statured people with this bulbous skull shape. So that was considered and noted by the archaeologists as a different form of cranial deformation. By the way, all the cranial deformation on the island was determined to be genetic and not from boarding.
Right.
Yes, because there was no indication of it. There were no artifacts found. All the archaeologists agree that it was a genetic trait of these people that they had this cranial deformation or skull elongation. And also, like I said, then they found at least two, but there could be more in this one cemetery in Malmök of these average statured people with this bulbous skull that was not the same shape as our skulls today.
So I also heard you mention little people like dwarfs found there as well. So we have total Lord of the Rings going on. So how many of these dwarf people have been found, and are they found in the same settlements as the giants or different?
Yeah, so they were definitely so all of these little genetic deformities, shall we say, or differences were treated with a tremendous amount of reverence by the ancient giants. And so there was at least one little person burial found there. This person was believed to have lived a very long life. They were given excuse me, an elite burial. So they weren't considered just a family member or someone. They were given an actual elite burial. This is known through the grave gifts,
Mhm.
and the burial itself, the intricacy of the burial, as well as the intricacy of the stones placed atop the burial. And this person was, yeah, very well taken care of. There was also a woman she was the oldest person found in the one cemetery that's at least 7,000 years old. She was buried all alone in the center of the cemetery with a very complex grave of configuration. She was actually there was a giant sea turtle shell placed on a type of platform made of stones, and then her body was put on top of that. So she was given an elite burial, and she had a humpback. So this could have been due to her age or her diet, but that wasn't found in many of the other, or I think any of the other skeletal remains. So because she lived a long life, clearly she was given a lot of food. She didn't have as difficult a life as you would suspect. I also believe this was a matriarchal society. So women were in control. So she might have been either a shaman or some sort of chief in charge. But so these people with these deformities, what we would think would be setbacks, were actually treated with a tremendous amount of reverence, and they were very much taken care of into old age. So it's believed that some archaeologists have found this to be common in other ancient contemporaneous societies, that they even show that in groupings where there were burials where there were even more little people burials found, that these people were carried. They show petroglyphs of carrying the people through life. And so it's actually interesting how they perceived something that could be perceived, that is perceived entirely differently today. It was considered almost sacred in a sense, and they were treated as such.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. I've heard you talk a little bit about the Atlantis connection, which I'm into Atlantis. I like all that stuff. But okay, so there's a lot of um, rumors of people like looking for stuff off the Bimini coast and underneath the water connected to Atlantis and this and that. And then I heard you say that they called these islands basically the something like the survivors of Atlantis, or what was it?
So the islands are called the Antilles, and Antilles is of Atlantis essentially. So this Antilia, which was an island that disappeared. So the original explorers who arrived believed that the islands were part of Atlantis and called them the Antilles, meaning of Atlantis. So they believe that these islands were fragments of Atlantis, that not just Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, but the other islands that they came across as well. They're the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles were all considered fragments of Atlantis.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty interesting to me because uh, And then what's Cuba's connection? Because I know Cuba has had some giants too.
Yes. Yeah, it's very strange. We can't go there because we have US passports. I would love to go. I know exactly
I
the cave.
went.
You
Uh,
did?
yeah, I
Wow.
went for 2 weeks. It was the worst trip I've ever been on.
Um,
But it's just because it's even when you can go, it's really not ready for tourism. Like I got sick. Like it's
uh, terrible.
um
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it's a beautiful island. It really is a beautiful island. But yeah, I went in 2000 and right when they opened it. They opened it for a minute when Obama was president and then I think it was open for like 4 or 5 years. So I went then. Yeah.
Oh, lucky. I didn't. I wish I could have gone. My parents actually did go too on a cruise. And when they went to get their global entry, they were questioned about why they went to Cuba. So if you get global entry, that watch out for.
Yeah, and I heard you talk about some of I know there's some crazy cool caves in Cuba too, and I know you talked about some connections with that on another podcast that I heard. So, yeah.
Caves are big with the giants, giants from all over the globe, not just those found in the islands. And interestingly, Bonaire has the most caves of any of the Caribbean islands. They have at least 400, most are unexplored. Aruba has a lot of caves as well. There is a legend that there's a cave that you can go into an Aruba and it goes in an underground tunnel to Venezuela. I don't know if that's true, but that is a story that's told on the islands. There's a story about a Boy Scout troop that went into the caves to help a local, actually wasn't a local researcher, I believe he was a researcher from the University of Miami, and was helping him to explore these caves for burial urns, because some of the burials are in urns as well. And they never came out, and so people say, oh, they got lost in the cave system, which is totally possible to be lost in the cave system. These caves are enormous and they riddle the whole underground of Aruba, and Curacao also has caves. So a lot of the burials that you'll find are in the caves. They never mixed activities within the caves. So for example, if you had petroglyphs in the cave, then there were only petroglyphs in the cave. If there were burials in the cave, then there were only burials in the cave. And if there was habitation in the cave, then there was only habitation in the cave. And they never mixed the activities. So these caves, a lot of them are inaccessible. So you kind of realize that they were probably being used by the elite. I believe one cave was in Aruba, a birthing chamber. In this cave is a petroglyph of a woman with a baby in her stomach. And then on the wall are little dots of what I would consider births, from what I've known from ancient societies, and how they have birthing chambers, even going into the Navajo, well, the Anasazi, shall we say.
Okay.
They also, in Sedona, I've seen them have a birthing chamber with the same concept, with these little dashes. Even in Japan, they have birthing chambers with almost the identical petroglyph found in Aruba, and these little dots. And this cave is very inaccessible. And that's the one thing that to take note. The other thing to take note is that there weren't a lot of births. So I think giving birth to a baby whose skull is elongated could have led to a lot of problems during childbirth. And also, I don't think there were a lot of giants in particular. These skeletal remains, although there are a lot, there are also average statured burials as well that exceed the giant burials. And so I think the giants were in charge, and then the average statured people were, the subjects of the ones in charge.
Well, I wonder if the gestation period was longer too, because like within like the bigger you get in animal kingdom, like it takes like what 2 years to grow an elephant or something, or 4 years or something thought it was 4 years for a woolly mammoth. I mean, like the bigger you get, the longer your gestation period is. So maybe that is also a thing too.
Could have been. That could be. Yeah, we don't know. And we know that there were infants burials found who the babies also had elongated skulls, which is also another indication that this wasn't from skull binding, because if you're doing skull binding on a baby, it will take 6 months for the skull to elongate. So up until 6 months old, the baby will not have an elongated skull. At 6 months, then the baby begins to develop the skull elongation. So the infants that were found were younger than 6 months, and they already had elongated skulls.
So you have seen some of these skeletons yourself, or you at least got to see one giant skeleton, right?
Yes, yes, in Bonaire. It's called the Bonaire skeleton. The Bonaire skeleton is conclusive evidence by the archaeologists, it is in their summation, that this skeleton is a giant skeleton, that Vespucci was correct, that there were indeed giants on the island. And this skeleton is very different anatomically. His head is slightly elongated. They say he's a male about 47 years old. And he's crumpled up into a case. I mean, it's such a shame, because that's not even how the burial was found. And I'm not quite sure why I guess just space, it's a little tiny, tiny house. It's a private museum in Bonaire, in the capital, that no one even knows about or goes to. And then here in the corner is this little display case with this crumpled skeleton, but his head is just fascinating. He is considered to be about 500 years old, but I think he's probably much older. There's not been any dating done on the skeleton whatsoever. And he is the most complete giant skeleton ever found in the Caribbean. There were skulls that were taken from some of the grave sites, two of which are now missing, but they were on display in Curacao at their museum. And those two skulls were considered giant skulls. As a matter of fact, the description beneath them described the skulls as being from the race of giants who used to live in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, and were about 8 feet tall or taller. So and that I have documented. I have the photos from the archaeological report with those skulls, pictures of them. And then I also have the newspaper article of a reporter from 1980 from the Reading Eagle in Pennsylvania, who went to the museum in Curacao and actually saw the skulls. So the skulls fairly recently have disappeared, probably about 7 years ago, when there was a renovation at the museum, and allegedly the Dutch came in and took the skulls. No one knows where the skulls are.
Okay, so let's get a little conspiratorial here. What's going on with all the missing? Like, why? What's your best guess on why, if it's anything giant related, it's just like washed clean?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things.
That's a story like within everything, like whether it's Lovelock Cave or it's,
Right.
Sardinia giant stuff like that. Like there's legends that like the people there talk about how like if you find a giant, you don't tell anybody anymore. Like you don't like what is that? Like it's kind of a global phenomenon.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I think excuse me, some of these skulls, I think, are absconded by people for their private collection or skeletons. I think there's a lot of that of theft going on. I think in this country, if you find skeletal remains that are giants, they're automatically considered Native American, and you can't touch them. And then they're either buried again or taken by a tribe that says that they're part of the tribe. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case, that these giant remains are part of these groups that may be taking control over them. I think also some people have spent a lot of their time and effort of their lives to promote Darwinism and the theory of evolution and theories just in general of ancient history. And to have these giants pop up on the timeline are inconvenient. First of all, it shows that we're devolving, as far as I'm concerned. If they had larger brains and stronger bones and were taller, to me, that would appear to be. And so I think that that's a major part of it too. I think also admitting that there are giants would also, by some accounts, mean that some parts of the Bible are true and accurate, particularly those that pertain to the giants, such as, in Genesis, this talk of the giants, Genesis 6, for example. So I think that that's another component of why they don't want to talk about it, why these bones disappear. And I know there are secret societies. Gary Wayne is someone who talks about it, that sometimes maybe these secret societies who think that they're related to the giants in some way, that they'll take these bones and use them in their rituals or such. So I think these are all things that happen to the giant bones. And I think the saddest part is that because of all these hurdles, we can only get so close to the answers. And then, like in Curacao, like the skulls are missing, and there was going to be, as a matter of fact, there was going to be DNA research done on one of the skulls found in Aruba that was in the Curacao Museum. But the anthropologist who was going to do the research, her plane crashed and she died. So the research never went on from there. And it's such a shame. I know the archaeologist in Aruba, he tells me, Heather, I'll give you information about the giants. For sure there were giants, but I can't talk openly about it because it will jeopardize my credibility. So then you have people just not wanting to talk about it because of their credibility, so all these things are not helpful to the research of the giants, which did exist.
Yeah, I think so too. So I mean, like it's just super crazy how it works out like that. I mean, do you think that I don't know, do you think that there's giants that still exist? Like not just like the genetic anomaly that happens every once in a while, because we do have people alive today that are like, I think the tallest person's like 8'11" or something, like the last time I looked. I mean, like there are athletes and things that are 7-8 feet, like that happens. But I mean, okay, you talked about I can't remember the name of the island, but you said there is a place that they claim that no one ever goes to, but that actual like giants exist there today. Where's that?
Yeah, so that's in the Solomon Islands. So in the Solomon Islands, they're very remote. They're very difficult to get to. I've tried to get to them. It takes a lot of time. That there is an island. The Solomon Islands are made up of many islands, and one of these islands is thought to be the lair of the giants. And no one goes to the island. No one who's local would ever think of going there. There are reports of the giants coming to one of the more populated areas of the islands and stealing children, raising them as their own, or eventually when the child, if it's a female, grows up, they mate with the female, then they have a hybrid giant human child. As a matter of fact, it was only recently that one of these hybrid women, the result of a kidnapping and then a mating, she lived into old age and recently passed away. They say that she didn't know English, but she could communicate with the giants. She was very hairy. So it's actually intriguing. I find it so intriguing.
Like Bigfooty, like we're kind of like Bigfooty there, or what?
Almost the vibe I get from the descriptions given is that there really are a blend of human and like almost an animal, almost like Bigfoot, but not so much. I think they look more human. They must be, if indeed it's true that they kidnapped someone and had a baby, a human and had a baby, then they have to be very genetically compatible with us. So they can't be too far away from us in terms of DNA. But the people, the locals, they speak very openly about it. I mean, it's not mocked, it's accepted, it's part of their culture, are these giants. So that's one place I always wanted to go to, just to do more research on the giants. And and then of course you're curious, is there a connection between those giants living today and the giants who lived thousands of years ago in the Caribbean. And so that would be another component to research, because people always ask me, is there a connection between like Bigfoot and the giants? I don't think so. I think that the giants were far more sophisticated, very knowledgeable. They definitely had large brains. They might have been monotheistic, and they had a patriarchal society. Although they do say that Bigfoot, they believe matriarchal, sorry, society. They believe that maybe Bigfoot has a matriarchal hierarchy as well. But I don't see the Bigfoot as being as sophisticated as
Well, I don't know. I mean, Bigfoot, it depends. Like, I mean, yeah, they look like, you know, kind of like hairy ape sort of situation thing, but at the same time, they're kind of interdimensional and or related. Like, there's a lot of UFO sightings associated with them too, and they're also able to, they aren't caught.
That's
You know?
true. And there is a lot of supernatural activity around the giants as well. And that's not just the giants in the Caribbean. You'll hear about this giants even in Europe and here in North America, that there's certain lights coming out of caves and strange sightings in the sky. Sometimes you'll hear that there is some sort of anomaly, supernatural anomaly surrounding the giants, and that's common too. That's something that's common. So I wonder if that has some connection as well.
Well, I mean, you know, there was also I don't know, like like in the 2000s, like the Afghanistan story of like the giants, like, you know, that one who was alive in a cave that killed a soldier and they killed it and took it or whatever. I mean, I'm a big like inner earth stuff's going on. I'm a big like I think there's stuff going on in caves and stuff. There's just too many stories all over the place of stuff going on that I think there could be a world within the world we know. So
And you bring up the underworld, because that's where the giants of the Caribbean are said to come from. They're said to have come from inside the earth. So in Bonaire is a stone, and it's called the Mother Stone. It's also called the Bonaire Stone. And it is a monolith, a single monolith on the shore of limestone. And in the center is a huge indentation, which is called the belly button. It's the navel. They call it the navel of the world, which there are navels of the world all over the world. I've seen one in Easter Island, and then this lesser known one in Bonaire. And the story goes is that through this navel, the giant came out, the first giants came out. And the navel has an umbilical cord attached to the center of the earth, which is the mother, the divine female. And the mother gives birth to the giants below the earth, in the center of the earth. And the giant connected to the umbilical cord comes through the navel, and that's how the giants ended up on the islands. And so that's the creation story of the giants. And giants coming from the underworld is a very common theme. Even it's believed that the Nephilim were living in the earth or under the earth, in the ground. So I think that's a very good point that you bring up about the underworld, because I think there could be some connection between that story, because that story, you hear it all over. You hear it in Easter Island, you hear it in Bonaire. I mean,
yeah.
It's a common, you read about it in the Bible. So this is a common theme, that these giants live within the earth
And in caves and things. Yeah. I mean, and I also think that like back to your point about like the devolution of people, you know, there when you really start looking closely into these megalithic sites and all these like cool ancient sites, which and I'm a big into that, whether it's like Egypt or Peru or wherever it is you're going. Yeah, we don't have the same technology they had. Like we've devolved from that building, you know. And I guess if people don't really think that just on like first plain sight, you just have to go put your hand on one of them and then go like, oh right. I'm not saying, yeah.
Right. And that's a great point you bring up. You actually have to visit these sites. You can't look on Google and then I have all these experts they'll come to me from Google and they'll say, I saw a picture on Google, and I'm like, no, you have to see these sites. And you don't have to travel all over the world. I mean, an hour from me here in New York is the Balanced Stone, the dolmen in North Salem, New York, which is perched on 5 pieces of quartzite. Is this giant stone of pink granite with petroglyphs on it that is an equinox marker. I mean, you have to actually see this site. If you go online, it's it's a glacial erratic or something like this. It's just, that's not research, you know. I mean, I appreciate that people can't get out and it's difficult and expensive and time consuming.
Yeah,
But
but in America, we have mounds everywhere. We have all kinds of like, you know, like, I mean, I was lucky to be raised in New Mexico where I had all kinds of like, you know, my Chaco Canyon, my bandolier, my like whatever, my Gila. But at the same time, like, yeah, like there are cool anomalies every place that you live in the world. Go see them and yourself. And I don't know, like maybe you'll have hits like every once, like I have had like weird paranormal experiences in so many of these different places. Like I'll get like weird, like just flashes or, you know, some sort of situation. And yeah, so you just have to, you know, it doesn't have to be like the three main you don't have to go to the Great Pyramids. You don't have to go to Machu Picchu. You can go to other places as well that are locally. So that's a great point. I love that.
yeah, I mean, I like you're saying. I mean, I walked in. We also have ancient stone chambers here, and they're similar to the chambers found in Ireland. And I've walked into them, and all my batteries for all my equipment were drained. My watch stopped. You know, I've been felt a presence physically push me out of a burial chamber during broad daylight. I mean, and this chamber is notorious. I didn't know it, but notorious for pushing people out of it, which I found out after I was pushed out of it. Because you start to think, am I going crazy? Is this nuts? I mean, I didn't go back in that chamber for a year, over a year after that, because I figured I wasn't wanted there. Next time something will hit me on the head, or I don't know
Right.
what's going to happen. I don't want to tempt fate, but I have had also these anomalies and at these sites, and strange lights at some of the sites in Aruba. So yeah, to go to these sites and to discover your own, just go hiking. And I mean, there's so many places here in New York and even New England where people are just hiking and they see a strange monolithic stone that's pointed to the summer solstice sunrise and has petroglyph etchings on the side of it. You know, that's very interesting and magical. So yeah, it's to
Yeah.
walk around and see. There's so much in North America, even in Canada. There's so much, and we just, you know, we've been conditioned to think, oh, Columbus came here, and then everything started. You know, but there's a tremendous ancient history in the United States, and
Well,
you know,
I think about that a lot with, excuse me, we have highways and these roads that we're allowed on. And then, you know, you have like these little city structures and then all the other stuff in between, we don't really go into that much. Like there's
right,
not that much stuff, you know. So I I mean, I know I do I'm pretty into exploring and digging, and I'm a rock hound. I like love my crystals and my fossils and all that stuff, you know. And I've found dinosaur teeth myself, and I've found like ammonites and brachiopods and all these things. And it's always like where the least humans have been is where you need to go. I mean,
right.
and it's like we have this sort of like idea that everything has been explored, and it's not really the case, actually. Like I think we're very sheltered into these little corners that this is what you are allowed to go and see and do. So yeah.
And a lot of sites are on private property. So in Aruba, thankfully, people will invite me and say, oh, I have petroglyphs on my property. I have a balanced stone on my property. So that, and people keep it close to their vest because they don't want people to know about it. They don't want it to be exploited in any way.
Yep.
So if you're trusted by the local community, then you'll be clued into these major sites and things that you wouldn't know about otherwise, that are on their private property and just adding to the story, particularly with the megaliths in Aruba. I find that often.
And rightfully so, you know, because like that they're guarded about it, because I mean, look at when you go to any museum, like very small percentage of their holdings are actually on display. You know, it's these things can be confiscated and just, you know, lost to sands of time.
Yes, if you go to a basement of a archaeology museum, which I've had the honor of doing in Aruba, you'd be astounded. I mean, it's just boxes and boxes of bones and ancient shells and I mean artifacts, and it's just it boggles the mind. And none of this stuff is on display. It's just I don't even know how they choose what to put on display, because when you see what's in the basement, you're like, how is this not on display, or how
Yeah,
is this
this is
not on
cool.
display? Yeah, it's so frustrating, but that's a problem. People don't realize that the real story of these museums, all of them pretty much, is in the basement.
And I guess like you know, I used to work at I've worked at a couple museums, and I like I have a master's in art history, and like I was definitely in like that realm for a long time. That's a very boxy existence. It's a very I don't know, like there's a proper way of how this should be and this should be and this should be, and like so it's weird. I think we're eventually going to have a lot more cool private museums that people like us open our own selves with, like interesting findings, and just have people come in and like be more interactive with stuff. I don't think you're going to break the system from within the system. You have to build a system outside of the system,
Right.
you know,
I
especially with this alternative way of maybe looking at some of these other elements of history that are there.
right. I agree. As a matter of fact, one of the projects I'm hoping to undertake when I go back to Aruba is helping to start a new museum that they're building. And in this new museum, they will have an area on the giants and research on the giants. So part of what I'm trying to do is repatriate these two skulls that are missing back to Aruba so that they can be on display in the museum as part of the giant display. So, and that's the Aruban government coming to me and asking me for help in participating and putting together this new museum with this great information about the giants. And I'm hopeful that I can get back these skulls. So far, I've had no luck. So
Yeah.
it'll be a real struggle, because once they're out of your possession, and this was globally with artifacts, they're very hard to get back. People don't want to give them back. So
Yeah, just look
even
at the
though
British Museum. They got the Parthenon marbles. They got it. I mean, like whatever. They got everything there.
Moai, exactly. Same with the Museum of Natural History. They have a basalt moai. So yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, the Egyptian artifacts, what they've been through all over the world.
Everywhere.
So it's going to be an uphill battle, but I'm hopeful it's one that I'll be focused on once I get back to Aruba.
Very cool. Okay, so tell us where people can find you, and tell us about okay, so I know you got this conference coming up. Tell us about that, and tell us about the book. Tell us some stuff.
Great. So yeah, I'll be speaking in London in October, on October 29th. The information can be found on my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram. It's the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, and I've spoken at it 2 times in the past. You can find, I think both of those presentations are on YouTube. One is about the giants, and one is about the megaliths of the giants in Aruba. And so I'll be there in person, but it's a hybrid event. So if you want to just be online, you can be online too. And I'll be finishing up my book and publishing it in Aruba. It'll be The Islands of the Giants, The Lost Race of Giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. And what else am I doing? Oh, and I'm going to try to build up my YouTube page. I have to get more followers and subscribers, because I'm going to start, when I get back to Aruba, doing interviews with the local population.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
So I'll be doing my first interviews will be about someone who lived on the island during World War II and what it was like to live in Aruba, which was in the crosshairs during World War II, which people don't even know about. They were bombed. I mean, it was just horrifying. And then I'm also going to be doing interviews with people who have giants in their family. I hear a lot of times from the local people that they have a giant who was a cousin, their friend was a giant, their uncle was a giant. So I'm going to start to document just really small, short videos, trying to get this all
On
recorded so
record,
that
yeah.
for posterity, so that people can enjoy it. So soon I'll be promoting my YouTube channel, which is there now. You can subscribe to it, Heather L. Arnold. There's nothing there though. And then I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Heather L. Arnold.
Okay,
And
cool. Well, I would love to help you with anything I can help you with the YouTube.
yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, it'll be a new facet doing videos, but I think it's a very effective medium. So I'm
It's
looking.
fun. I think it's fun. And like
Yeah.
the interviewing thing is you find out like you'll find out way cooler stuff than you think you will. So
All right, great. I'm looking forward to it.
cool. All right. Well, is there anything else that I didn't touch on that you kind of wanted to touch on, or do you think we covered it?
No, I think we did great, and we went over a lot of different interesting topics. It was wonderful. All my favorite things. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on, Heather. It's been a pleasure, and we'll have to have you on again sometime.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, cool. Bye.
Bye.